Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting with the Workers' Party of Britain. And the topic for tonight's meeting, Labour and Anti-Semitism, a tale of capitulation. So over to the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, George Galloway.
Thank you very much, Rob, comrades of the Workers' Party on Zoom and friends on many other platforms watching this now live or later. I am very happy to turn to the subject as advertised, but I hope you will permit me a short digression, which I hope will bring joy unbounded to all of our members and others. Many people are keen that we should begin to look forward to which constituencies we'll be fighting in the general election. And I want to bring you the news that the leadership of the party have decided on our first constituency. There will be many more, but we will have to pick and choose them depending on our strength in any particular area and other tactical and even strategic purposes. But the first one that I'm authorized to nominate tonight is the Exeter constituency. Now, Exeter City had a very, very bad night at Wembley last night, and we thought that they were in need of cheering up. So am I, because thanks to a couple of my friends who are big supporters of Exeter City, I ended up with my scarf on watching them in Wembley at the playoffs last night, and it was an almost unmitigated disaster. So we will be standing in the Exeter constituency, which will be good news, I hope, to all of our members in the southwest of the country, and they are quite plentiful, actually. The southwest, one of our strongest areas, which is a pleasant surprise. And I want to tell you further that we are recommending to our members in the southwest who will pick the candidate that they field our good friend and one of the very first members of the Workers' Party. He is a film actor and stage actor extraordinaire, and of course a star of Poldark, which is quite important down in the southwest. He is, of course, Guy Rivaux. We all know him. He's a class fighter. He's an internationalist, a champion of Cuba, an opponent of imperialist wars, a big supporter of the Yellow Vest movement in his native France. He will have to become British by the time of the next general election. That's the only downside, Guy. But I'm sure the French will allow you to have dual citizenship. But if the members agree to our recommendation, then you can be in the field immediately as the prospective parliamentary candidate for the Workers' Party of Britain for the Exeter constituency. And I've got news for you, Mr. MP Ben Bradshaw. We are coming to get you. You are one of the worst, the most loathsome of all the Blairites that infested the Labour Party, that dragged the country into war after war after war, and you are going to finally be held to account, not from the right, but from the left. And we hope that all socialists, all fighters against war, all supporters of the previous leadership of the Labour Party, of Jeremy Corbyn, whom Mr. Bradshaw did so much to help destroy. We hope that all of these trends, these tendencies within the Exeter constituency, and there are many. I spoke many times in Exeter in the run-up to the Iraq War to massive, packed audiences, and I look forward to doing so again, hopefully on behalf of my friend Guy Revaux and the Workers' Party candidate in the general election. Once that's done, we'll secure election premises, we'll get the printing presses turning, and the campaign will begin immediately that it's legally possible to do so, to step outside in numbers. And Guy, if you are the candidate, I promise you a huge turnout of Workers' Party members on weekends coming down to your lovely part of the world and kickstarting your campaign. Now turning, Rob, to the business in question, the proximate reason for it is, of course, the brutal expulsion from the front bench of the Labour Party of the Corbyn candidate for leader, Rebecca Long-Bailey. She was a poor candidate for leader, as I said many, many times, publicly and privately. At the time, the Labour Party lefts would have been far better choosing either Ian Lavery, who was the then chairman of the party, or Richard Bergen, a man who ended up running for deputy leader. He got a very poor vote considering he was the best candidate, not just for deputy, but for leader or deputy. But they couldn't have done worse than putting up Rebecca Long-Bailey. She simply did not have the right stuff. She did not have the right presence, the right heft as a political leader, and she did not have the right politics, which she quickly displayed by the alacrity with which she signed up to the Board of Deputies 10 pledges, which included named individuals who must never be allowed anywhere near the Labour Party. And she signed it, and a lot of good it has done her. Which leads me to, if you like, my theme for the evening. You may have seen the meme which I circulated just a little earlier on various platforms. It was a picture of Michael McGahey, my friend, my teacher, my mentor, the former vice president of the National Union of Mine Workers and president of the Scottish area of the NUM, who coined the phrase, "If you don't run, they can't chase you." And that will be the theme of what I have to say this evening, because, of course, the Labour lefts, almost all of them, certainly those closest around the Jeremy Corbyn circle, and including Jeremy Corbyn himself, have run from the beginning. And if they had not run, they could not have been chased. They might still have been defeated, but it would have been a rather more dignified defeat than the death by 1,000 cuts, death by 1,000 expulsions, death by 1,000 witch hunts that they have had to endure. As Mr. Churchill said, it is a fatal and forlorn hope to keep feeding the crocodile in the hope that it will eat you last, because the crocodile will go on eating until everything in front of it has been consumed. And the crocodile in this case is the Blairite weaponization of the issue of anti-Semitism. It's important to get that the right way around. Jews have every right to be concerned about anti-Semitism. They have every right to warn, even constantly warn, of the dangers of Jew hatred, which is the actual definition of anti-Semitism. Jews have every right to do that. And whatever the political stripe of the spokespeople of the a board of deputies, and so on. They have every right to raise the alarm if they feel that wittingly or unwittingly people are guilty of encouraging anti-Semitic tropes and feeding the crocodile, to continue the metaphor, of anti-Semitism. But it's the Blairites who deliberately, systematically, industrially weaponized the justifiable concerns of the Jewish community about anti-Semitism as a weapon to destroy Jeremy Corbyn. Not because of any tuppence halfpenny he was going to put on the income tax or free broadband or any of the other worthy but dull reforms that he and his circle were proposing, but mainly because Jeremy Corbyn posed a danger to Britain's entire post-war foreign policy, our entire role as the loyal and willing auxiliary of the United States of America. Not just in the Middle East, perhaps not even mainly in the Middle East, but on issues like relations with Latin America, relations with Russia, with China, attitude to NATO, and so on. These were the risks that the ruling class was not prepared to take with Jeremy Corbyn. And they tried many different tropes to undermine, to destroy Corbyn. Anti-Semitism was not actually their first choice. Their first choice was Ireland. The deliberate attempt to paint Corbyn and MacDonald in particular as far too close to the Irish Republican struggle of recent decades was the first attempt that they made. But to coin a phrase from one of them that I saw recently, I won't dignify it by giving his name, these things failed to cut through, as did the attempt to paint Corbyn as a KGB agent, literally a KGB agent, paid by the Czech state apparatus to spy in Parliament for the then Soviet Union. An utterly absurd charge, of course, if you know as much as I know about Jeremy Corbyn's actual politics towards the Soviet Union, not to mention the politics of the then Trotskyite, open Trotskyites, like MacDonald, who were in his circle. The idea that they were working for the Soviet Union was perfectly absurd, and that too failed to cut through. And there were many others, but they decided that the one that was cutting through the most was the charge that Corbyn and his circle and the Labour Party generally was a nest of anti-Semitism. And the only evidence that they ever presented was evidence of Corbyn's hostility to the political state of Israel. The only evidence they ever produced was that Corbyn historically, though not at all by the end, was hostile to the political ideology of Zionism. Now, it ought not to need to be said again, but let me say it. To oppose Zionism is not to hate Jews any more than to oppose the brutal dictatorship of Saudi Arabia is to hate Muslims, or to have been opposed to the Soviet Union was to hate Russians. As a matter of fact, you could argue the precise opposite. I want to free the Russian people. from the wicked Soviet system. And that's why I spend so much time trying to destroy the USSR and the communist ideology on which it is built. Do you see my point? It is simply absurd to say that opposition to Israel means you hate Jews, not least because a very significant number of Jews also agree with us that Israel is a settler colonial state. And we in the Workers' Party oppose it for that reason, and only for that reason, as we oppose all settler colonial states. There are few left in the world, but Israel is, of course, the most significant of those that are left in the world. The settler plan was our responsibility. It was given its essential energy by our government, by the Balfour Declaration more than 100 years ago. And so we have here in Britain an historic and special responsibility to oppose settler colonial states that were our responsibility. We gave permission for that settler colonial state. And it was no different from the settler colonial states in the then Rhodesia, in South Africa, in Kenya. It was white Europeans invading the country of people who were technologically and militarily and financially weaker than them, and taking their land and building a settler colonial state on it. That's why we oppose Israel. It has nothing whatsoever to do with hatred of Jews, against which, of course, we stand with our blood if necessary, with our lives if necessary. It was people like us in the resistance in the occupied lands of Europe in the Second World War who were giving their blood and their lives to defeat Hitler fascism with its murderous genocidal intentions towards not just, of course, but towards every single last Jew in the European continent, if not on the entire planet, if they could reach them. And it was the failure of Corbyn and his lieutenants. I don't think you can call Long Bailey a lieutenant. She was more a corporal of Corbynism. It was their total failure to start off on the front foot with that argument, which led them to the dreadful end that they suffered. Very significantly, not decisively, Brexit was the decisive reason why they were crushed, but the anti-Semitism charge was a very significant reason for the absolutely powerless condition in which Labour went into the election in 2019, last year. It was their failure not to run. It was their failure not to stand firm. And if they had stood firm, of course the attacks would have continued, but at least you would have a sound, principled, theoretical, and practical basis for your position. Instead, they followed the policy of running and throwing one after another, after another, after another of their own friends into the mouth of the crocodile. And Chris Williamson was perhaps the most significant. He was the last before the final defeat, but he will not be the last, as the fate of Rebecca Long Bailey demonstrates. Just because they've destroyed Jeremy Corbyn just because they have installed a wooden model of Tony Blair in his place, it doesn't mean that they have finished the witch hunt. They are determined, if necessary, even to expel Jeremy Corbyn himself. And there are people demanding that, believe it or not. Not so long ago, they were demanding the action be taken against Diane Abbott. There will be many others like them for whom the demand to expel will be raised. But the pitiful, absolutely pitiful conduct of Rebecca Long Bailey once the attack began this week, or last week rather, cannot go without comment, because it speaks not just to her weakness, and there's no point in kicking her when she is down, but it speaks to the weakness of the entire Corbyn project. First, that they thought that she was the best leadership candidate, and second, because they thought that defending her could only be done by throwing Maxine Peake under the bus. Now, Maxine Peake is an actor of the first rank. She is a Labour activist par excellence. She has traipsed across the entire country for years, giving support to members of parliament, to parliamentary candidates in her own time when she could have been acting and earning. And she wrote a boilerplate article for the Independent newspaper, not a scintilla of which could be remotely described as anti-Semitic. It was a statement of the bleeding obvious, a statement of obvious fact that the American police forces were increasingly sending their police officers to Israel for training. Who can deny that? It's all over the Israeli television, all over the Israeli newspapers. It's in the virtual Jewish library, chapter and verse. It's a statement of fact, and a statement of fact cannot, by definition, be an act of anti-Semitism. Now, if she was arguing, I don't know her, I've never been inside her brain, if she was arguing that American police officers are only brutal because they have been going to Israel for training, then that would be wrong. It still would not be anti-Semitic, because Israel doesn't equal Judaism. The Israeli police force does not speak for, act for, represent the Jewish people in the world, and even many Jewish people in Israel. So it would not even in those circumstances be anti-Semitic, but it would be wrong, because trust me, as the 100 million massacred indigenous Americans already found out, and as many others are finding out to this day, the American security forces don't need lessons from anyone on brutality. But the truth is that both the Israeli security forces and the American law enforcement agencies are both responsible of brutality towards, in the case of Americans, their own people, and in the case of the Israeli security forces, the people of occupied Palestine, whom they have occupied either for 53 years, in the case of the West Bank and Jerusalem, now besieged in Gaza for a decade or more, or have occupied more generally since 1948. And that leads me to the timing of this brouhaha. Tomorrow, At least I think it will be tomorrow. I've been asked to write about it tonight when I finish this broadcast, in the anticipation that it will be tomorrow. The Prime Minister of Israel will commit the most egregious, gratuitous, deliberate destruction of the international legal system that we've seen even from him, even from them, for many years. He is going to, tomorrow, annex, confiscate, officially steal forever 40% of the West Bank that is supposed to be being given to the Palestinians for a mini-state under the Oslo Accords, agreed by the European Union, the United Nations, the United States of America, by international law. It's going to be ripped up tomorrow. And what is the Labour leader doing in the days running up to this gigantic crime which Israel is about to commit? He is sacking his own front benchers to satisfy the demands of those who see it as their role in life to protect and project the interests of that state of Israel, an international outlaw, a rogue state which cares nothing for international law, which kills Palestinian children, journalists, nurses, doctors, police officers, political leaders, at will, murders them in cold blood, at will. And instead of speaking against that, Labour members, even rank and file Labour members, are now actually in a state of terror as to whether they can even condemn it or not. And what language should they use in condemning it? It's now illegal in the Labour Party to describe Israel as an apartheid state. You get expelled for it. But some of the greatest minds in Israel openly refer to their own country as an apartheid state. In fact, just this day, the former head of Shin Bet, the Israeli Security Service itself, said what Netanyahu is about to do will officially transform Israel officially into an apartheid state. So you can say it in Israel. You can be the head of Shin Bet and say it in Israel. But if you say it in the Labour Party, you'll be expelled. Some of you know I was very close to the late and very fine Sir Gerald Kaufman, for a time the shadow foreign secretary for the Labour Party. Himself Jewish, himself brought up in a Zionist household, a former fundraiser for Israel. Sir Gerald Kaufman would have long been expelled by the Labour Party for his forthright condemnations of Israel and his forthright support for the Palestinian people. Even more extraordinarily, the late and great Mr. Ben himself would have had to be expelled by the Labour Party for the things that he has said about Israel and in support of the Palestinian people. This is the direction of travel in the British Labour Party. It is not going to change. So if you feel anything at all for the Palestinian people, if you oppose fundamentally the racist, apartheid, colonial settler state of Israel, what are you doing still in the Labour Party? Because they're already coming for you. They are already checking your tweets, checking your Facebook posts. God knows what else they are checking. And they're going to do to you what they did to Williamson and what they did to Long Bailey last week. If you are with Palestine, you need to be with us. Who else are you going to be with? Who else is going to speak for Palestine and against the apartheid state of Israel better than us, more clearly than us, more courageously than us? Do you think anyone can scare us on this subject? Because I could show you my scars under this hat. Even if they kill me, even if they kill us, our words will ring out in support of Palestine and after us, our children. So if this issue matters to you, then you should already have joined us, and you should join us now very quickly indeed. My last words on this. John MacDonald, the erstwhile Trotskyite, a man once super identified with the Palestinian cause, tweeted today in response to Rebecca Long Bailey's second apologia, the one on the day and another one in an article written by her today in the newspapers, her second abasement, self-abasement. John MacDonald said, oh, look at this. Doesn't this show the decency of Rebecca Long Bailey, who should be reinstated to the shadow cabinet sometime? Sometime. That's what these people have become. On their knees, not just in front of Alistair Campbell, and by extension Tony Blair, but on their knees, begging the Board of Deputies and Sir Keir Starmer to please forgive Rebecca. Never mind Maxine, she's now branded on her head. She now carries the brand on her head, endorsed by Long Bailey, who accepts that Maxine's article was anti-Semitic. Her own friend, Maxine, is branded forever. She might never work again. She's branded as an anti-Semite. But John MacDonald thinks that that is evidence of Rebecca Long Bailey's decency. Well, if that's decency, you can keep it. You can keep your misnamed Labour Party, which as every day goes by is less fitting, even to the mantle of the Labour Party gone by, even to Harold Wilson's Labour Party, even to James Callaghan's Labour Party, Michael Foot's Labour Party, Neil Kinnock's Labour Party, John Smith's Labour Party. You have become the resurrection of Tony Blair. That's what you've become. And if you want to spend the rest of your political lives toiling in the vineyard of Blairism in the hope that they might one day give you a break, then I pity your political choice. Rob, thanks very much. Happy to take any questions.
Excellent, George. Thank you. Very well said. We've got lots of hands going up and people wanting to make contribution. So first of all, let's go to Joshua.
Hi there, guys.
Hi, John. Hi there.
How's it going, guys? Not too bad?
Mm-hmm.
You can hear me fine? Yeah?
Yeah.
All good.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Now, I was just going to say, George, if we are to win the hearts and minds of anti-Zionist Israelis, okay, I think we should be careful not to smear them all as Zionists. Because, and I know you don't, George, because you had Miko Peled on your show, and he seems like a very decent, upstanding man who has dared to challenge his own state, which is more difficult for him on a psychological level, given his background, than it would be for a Palestinian, if you see what I mean. And I think that also, if we take other examples like Natalie Portman, who has dared to boycott award ceremonies in Israel, her homeland, as because in protest at Benjamin Netanyahu's deplorable acts of aggression against Palestinians. I really think that she is most deserving of the utmost praise, particularly given the fact that she is a celebrity and she has to be careful about how she presents her image, and has also been learning Arabic from a very young age. She has done a lot to highlight the plight of Palestinians, and I also think that if we are to successfully traverse the accusations of anti-Semitism, we have to ensure that when we criticize Israel, we criticize the Israeli government, the Zionist elements within Israel, Israeli defense forces. But when we say the Israelis, I think we have to differentiate between the Israelis as a people and the government, the regime, and the apparatus, and the people who work in that apparatus. I hope you can see what I'm sort of getting at in order to successfully tread the tightrope, because it is a tightrope, as per the establishment has recently demonstrated with their sacking of Rebecca Long Bailey. Do you see my point, George?
It's not a tightrope for us. We want nothing from the British establishment, and we welcome each and every manifestation of conscience and of sympathy for the plight of the Palestinian people, from whomsoever it comes, but especially if it comes from citizens of Israel itself. But I have to disappoint you. We are not just opposed to Netanyahu. We were opposed to his predecessors, to the armed forces of Israel. We are opposed to the entire ideological base of the state of Israel. We don't believe in ethno-supremacist states. We wouldn't believe in them if they were ethno-supremacist white states, as the Orange Free State wanted to become after the end of apartheid, and we will not do so in support of an ethno-supremacist Jewish state either. We don't believe in white states or Jewish states. We believe in democratic states. And our position is for a democratic state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, where all Jews, Muslims, and Christians live together as equal citizens under the law, under the Constitution. So that means we oppose the ideological basis for the state of Israel. Now, in that, we have some Israeli supporters. Not many, and certainly not Natalie Portman, but we do have some, like Miko Peled, the son of a general, and who himself was a soldier in the Israeli army, like Professor Ilan Pappé, the great professor of history, I think now at Oxford, and some others, but very few others. So we are comrades of those who, like us, want to see disappear the whole foundation of the settler colonial state of Israel and its replacement with a secular, binational, multi-religious, democratic state from the river to the sea. That's the only actual solution to the problem of the disinherited Palestinians and the distortions, perversions of Zionism in the lives of Jewish people. Zionism is the biggest enemy of the Jewish people. The least safe place in the entire world to be Jewish is in their so-called Jewish state of Israel. The people of Einstein, of Epstein, the people of Marx have been replaced in the minds of hundreds of millions of people around the world with the ogres of Sharon and Netanyahu and Begin and Shamir and these other killers. So we are against Zionism as an ideology, and we don't accept the premise that the settler colonialists had a right to come and take Palestinian land and build their ethno-supremacist state on it. So I'm afraid whilst we welcome, of course, all support for boycott and divestment and sanctions and refusals to go to commemorations, we welcome all snubs delivered to Netanyahu. But Netanyahu is here today, gone tomorrow. He might be in jail by Christmas, but his successor will be no different, essentially. As a matter of fact, because he's likely to be less ugly in the way he behaves than Netanyahu, his successor can be, in that sense, even worse. A bit like Trump and Hillary Clinton, if you like. So that's all I'm trying to say, Joshua. We have friends in Israel. We have many more friends who are Jewish outside of Israel and around the world. People like the ones I mentioned and others. But we have a very specific and carefully considered position on this question that I have tried to explain. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks very much, George. Let's go to Mara next. You've got your hand up there.
Hi, George. That was a rousing speech as usual.
Thank you.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
I used to be in Rebecca Long Bailey CLP until I resigned my membership in disgust 6 months ago. And my last CLP meeting with her was like a trip in my communist past, because it was a very Stalinist meeting where, even though she lacks the physical presence to intimidate anybody, the content of what she was saying and the people around her, who are quite close to momentum and I guess quite close to the levels of relative power that the left had at the time, controlled the conversation so extremely that the atmosphere in that room, and it was perhaps more than 200 people, it was quite a large meeting. It was the election autopsy, so it happened in January for people to think about what happened in the election. And the atmosphere was one of complete fear. So, of course, we discussed anti-Semitism. And she said the immortal words that still ring in my ears, that we must send labor members to these training sessions so that nobody ever says anything offensive ever again.
Training camps, re-education.
But she said that she wants members to never offend anybody ever again, which, if you think about that statement for a minute, is a complete impossibility. You will always offend somebody all the time. The only way to never offend anybody all the time or ever is to completely silence people and to make people, force people to just gently nod to sensitive topics. Now, she is supposed to be a solicitor. So for her to come up with a statement like that was it was surreal, because that's a complete failure of any understanding of how reality works in politics. And if you pretend to stand for good, for victims like the Palestinians or poor people in this country, then how are you going to allow that speech if you censor that speech? She doesn't get that point. So of course I made that point in that evening, and she just said that it's true that maybe these members aren't anti-Semitic for real, but they need to learn to not be anti-Semitic online. And she couldn't offer more intellectual investigation into that statement. However, at the end of the meeting, maybe 5 people reached out to me and said, I wanted to say the same thing, but I was afraid. I'm not sure what exactly they were afraid to lose. I see some people are saying I use Stalinist as a slur. I happened to be born in a country that was under USSR, and I lived Stalinism. For me, that was quite a bad thing. And by the way, the reason that I made the parallel is because in Romania, before 1989, if you complained, oh wow, people are getting quite upset. If you complained about anything, you would go to jail, where you would probably be beaten to death, like some of my parents' relatives and remote friends did. So the fact that the Labour Party allowed things to get to that level with Rebecca Long Bailey was quite a complete betrayal of democracy and any idea of freedom and justice, because nobody felt they were allowed to speak. And by the way, the other topic that was debated that night was trans women are women. And everybody who dared to put their fingers up and say maybe trans women are just trans women was completely bullied. So everybody voted for the motion that was put forth, and everybody left with the impression that they just cannot say anything in politics anymore.
That's a very startling and important contribution, you know. Let me take your last point first. The reign of intellectual terror inside the Labour Party is almost complete, and not just on the issue of Israel-Palestine. The trans issue has become literally intolerable. I see someone saying today that trans women can be pregnant, trans women can have periods, trans women need gynecological support, and so on. This insanity has become almost a parody of itself. And the same reign of intellectual terror is being maintained on that subject as on the subject of Israel-Palestine. So I say to those watching who may still be in the Labour Party, if you're prepared to go along with that, if you're prepared to be terrorized, terrified in meetings, so that you are singled out for re-education in the way that has just been described, then I really feel sorry for you. If you're prepared to live your life like that, I really feel sorry about that. The issue of anti-Semitism has always been, for us, from our political tradition, a very clear one. And if I were confronted with, and I do, I am on my radio shows, on my television shows, I am confronted with anti-Semitic words and tropes and ideas. And I brutally, you might say, confront them. If someone wishes to reduce the argument against finance capitalism to one word, one family, Rothschild, and thus blame the Jews for the crimes of high finance, I immediately attack that and very firmly, to the point of brutally attack it. I had someone on my show just last Sunday, not this Sunday past, the one before that, somebody who called up to bemoan the control of the press by Rothschild. And when I asked, what press does Rothschild control? He said Reuters. But Rothschild doesn't own Reuters and has never owned Reuters. He doesn't own any press. And so someone thinking and speaking in those ways is guilty of anti-Semitism. And they need to be re-educated, or in the case that they are a lost cause, they need to be completely shunned by people like us. But that's not what Maxine Peake was doing. To describe what Maxine Peake wrote as being anti-Semitic is a crime against her. As a matter of fact, it's a crime which is itself anti-Semitic, because it's supposed to be under the IHRA principles and examples, anti-Semitic to conflate Judaism with specific crimes of Israel. Well, that's what they were doing in reverse, which means Starmer is guilty of anti-Semitism in branding what Maxine wrote as anti-Semitic. It's a very interesting picture you've given us, Mara, because it's from the very near past, just in January, and in Rebecca Long Bailey's constituency, no less. That's the Labour Party for you folks. I'm surprised any of you still want anything more to do with it.
Thank you, George. We've got a few contributions in the chat that I can read out now. From Georgina, she says, when I was suspended for uncomradely acts, I was devastated. Actually, there was no evidence for months. And at the time, one didn't have to be a member of the Labour Party to be a member of Momentum. They refused to allow me to participate. I was treated like a leper, and an example was made of me to the others, not to support Palestinians. And this was only shortly before the second contrived Owen Smith versus Corbyn leadership election, which Corbyn won by a country mile anyway. There's a nice little anecdote that chimes in with Mara's experiences there from Georgina. Now, if I just scroll down a little bit, I've got another one from Christina coming up as well. Christina says, accusing anti-imperialists for racism when we are patently not racist but anti-apartheid, Irish Republican and pro-Palestine is part of a plan to make every opposition compliant to the needs of British capital, to beat us back onto mainstream imperialist lines on every front. Doesn't this demonstrate how much they hate real democracy? Isn't this a wake-up slap for people to leave Labour and join the Workers' Party's demands for freedom of speech and of conscience? This should be a rallying call for all to oppose the criminalisation of all criticism of Israeli colonisation and British imperialism. So thank you for Christina there. Now, next, I'm going to go to, if you would like to respond to any points there, George, on those contributions.
Maybe if I can, to the last of Christina's points, it certainly has proved to be so, because we've been busy this last few days following the sacking of Long Bailey, even than we were when Keir Starmer was elected. It's as if having piled straw after straw after straw on the camel's back, the sacking of Long Bailey on these grounds has finally broken the camel's back, and the flow of membership inquiries, new membership applications, followers has leapt by a very significant percentage in just the last few days, and I expect that will continue.
Thanks, George. Let's go to Sammy. You there, Sammy? Sammy? Not getting anything through from Sammy there. Okay, let's go to Fran.
Evening.
Evening, Fran.
I just wanted to make the point, the Marx quote, that history repeats itself, first as a tragedy and then as a farce. And my point was I was going to make about like actual people like in the Labour Party talking about Rothschild stuff, like the original anti-Semitism that was seen. And now you compare it to now, we're at the farce stage where it's come to a news article that very loosely, you know, it's not even anti-Semitic. It's the kind of stuff they throw at you on Good Morning Britain when you're up against Alan Sugar. But yeah, the thing that made it a farce for me was when I saw that the Independent were agreeing with their firing. The people who published the article, like how ridiculous is this getting? And finally, onto that, the more that they start crying wolf about anti-Semitism, the more actually anti-Semitic they are. To use the Jewish faith as a political tool is anti-Semitic. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, it's you say that's all you wanted to say, but it's a very significant thing that you said, because it is, you know, on the principle of the boy who cried wolf. If everything is being called anti-Semitic, then nothing in the end will be held to be anti-Semitic, including actual anti-Semitism. If everybody in the Labour Party, everybody in Unite, everybody in the Workers' Party, everybody here, there, and everywhere is called an anti-Semite, it's obviously devaluing the currency to the point of bankruptcy. And that, therefore, is a positive danger to Jewish people because anti-Semitism does exist. And in the in the lifetime of only a few, but still some people, still alive today, led to the Holocaust and the attempt to annihilate every last Jew in the European continent. So this is not a small thing. This is not something that should be played around with. Genuine anti-Semitism should be jumped on from the highest point and with the greatest weight. But if you falsely accuse people of anti-Semitism, then you are allowing anti-Semitism to actually sneak by like a thief in the night. And that is positively dangerous.
Thank you, George. Let's see if we can get Sammy back again now. Sammy, you there? No, nothing. Okay, I'm going to go to Colin.
Hi, thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Hi, Colin.
How you doing?
Good.
Well, I have to be careful when I speak about this area because of my own background. But one of the areas I'm interested in exploring with others is what is a Semite? What makes someone Semitic? How can we understand anti-Semitism if we don't understand what is a Semite person or culture and how we know that? And I don't know how many people are aware of that, but basically it's down to a language construct. And this language is obviously Hebrew, Canaan, Aramaic, Aramic, and Arab. All those languages are the main Semite structured languages, and all people who speak those languages as part of their cultural heritage are regarded as Semite people. But there are others. For instance, the Maltese have a Semite structure in their language, along with others. So do the Kurds, many North Africans, many East Africans. And more recently, looking into this again, I've discovered that some anthro-linguists are suggesting there is a similar structure amongst the Celtic languages, believe it or not. And I think it's important for us to recognise that there is an anti-Semitism towards Palestinians, because they are also a Semite people by virtue of that language structure. And I just wanted to point that out and see how we can understand what effect that has, because the Zionist is very anti certain forms of Judaism. It talks about the wrong kind of Jew, but is also very opposed at a racial ethnicity level to Palestinians. And I think that we need to recognise something here. And I'll welcome your comments on that, George.
Yeah, well, of course, they have all the attitudes to the original inhabitants of the land that they stole that all settler colonists have. The attitudes of the white settler colonialists in Zimbabwe and in South Africa towards the original people whose land they took is, of course, very similar to the attitude of racial superiority, of ethno-supremacist ideas is simple, not because they're Jews, but because they're colonialists. All empires, all colonizers behave that way. Of course, I understand the point that you're making, though very few of those who bandy the term anti-Semitism around are aware of the fact that the Palestinians themselves and all the others you mentioned are themselves Semites. There's also the point, which you didn't bring up, but let me do so, that you can convert to Judaism. I could convert to Judaism. It wouldn't make me Semitic. I cannot be Semitic. If all my children became Jewish, they would not be Semitic. They would be people who converted to a religion. Paradoxically, a religion which grants them the immediate right of return to a place that they have never been, and nowhere in their ancestry have any of their ancestors been. A right of return to somebody else's land with which we have absolutely no connection whatsoever. And this makes the whole thing even more absurd. But, and I always say this when the issue of the definition of Semitic comes up, whether someone is a convert or not, whether someone is a Semite or not, we do know what Jew hatred is. We do know because we can smell it, we can sense it, hear it when it emerges. And so whether today's Israelis converted en masse to Judaism in the year 800, or whether they're the only Semites, or whether they're Semites at all, in the end matters less to me, except as a debating point, than the fact that we stand foursquare against hatred and prejudice against Jews, because we are on the side of those who are oppressed and who are discriminated against. But that does not require us to side with the nonsensical idea. Let me quote Ilan Pappé, the eminent professor I referred to earlier. Imagine someone coming to your door in the dead of night with a gun and saying, my ancestors lived here in this house on this land 2,000 years ago, and I'm taking it back. You better grab your stuff and flee. If you don't, you might be killed. You must leave, flee, because this now is my house. Because my ancestors maybe or maybe not, lived in it 2,000 years ago. Imagine the chaos in the world if that became a general principle. Imagine if Romans, Greeks, Persians, all the ancient civilizations and peoples turned up where they think their ancestors might have been thousands of years before and claiming that land as their own. It is, as Ilan Pape put it that way, perfectly absurd, and only an idiot could genuinely adopt it as a political, as a philosophical position. Either an idiot or an opportunist, and most of them are the latter.
Thank you, George. Let's go to Sophia.
Hi, George.
Hi, Sophia. Nice
Hiya.
to see you as always.
And you too. Yeah, I'm noticing a lot of people are heartbroken and feeling betrayed by the Labour Party at the moment, just as I was at the beginning of the year when I left. And that's coming from someone that always said that they'd never join a political party. Maybe that's because I grew up in the Blair years, who seems to be Keir Starmer's puppet master at the moment. But I remember the day I joined the Labour Party, and it was in 2016, and it was the PMQs with David Cameron. Remember that Remainer that likes interfering with pigs, that chap. He said to Jeremy Corbyn, he said, and I remember it clearly, he said, "My mother would tell you to put on a suit, do up your tie, and sing the national anthem." And I was like, what? And Jeremy responded something very nice, like, "Oh, well, my mother would tell you to, to fully fund the NHS." Something like that. It was very nice, very much in keeping with the theme of, if they go low, we go high, which was ultimately his undoing in the end. So when David Cameron said that, I thought, well, they've got nothing on this man. Like, I checked his voting record. He was speaking and talking in a way that really resonated. And I thought the working class people are going to believe him. I believed him, and I joined the Labour Party and campaigned right up until last year. But if you fast forward to 2019 and you see what was being said, he's a terrorist, anti-Semite, Russian puppet, and the public believed that, and it was really devastating. So it just goes to show that if your opponent is going low, going high doesn't work. No amount of groveling and apologizing, capitulating, bowing, apologizing, it just doesn't work. And we just need to be better. We need to be better fighters, standing up for ourselves as well, because what I'm seeing at the moment is this emergence of groups and movements. They're saying that, fully inclusive, they're democratic socialists, this kind of thing, where, yeah, socialism is inclusive. It's us, it's the 99% versus the 1%. So I'm kind of done with the niceties. I'm sure a lot of people are feeling the same way. We want some fight, we want some power, and because at the end of the day, the liberals and the elite, they will use minorities and their struggles to divide us, like they did with weaponizing anti-Semitism, and they essentially shut down conversation, and they didn't give us a chance to actually talk and maybe get things wrong and then learn from it. So the question is, how do we make sure our party doesn't bow to the pressures of mainstream media? And also it's this offense, isn't it? You don't want to cause offense, because of course we stand against all forms of bigotry and discrimination, but we've got to learn, we've got to have a conversation. So how do we counteract this?
There's nothing like Sophia to make you feel old. She joined the Labour Party in 2016. I joined it in 1967. And when I joined it in 1967, it was a very different animal to what it is today. Although it had a right-wing leader, Harold Wilson, it was genuinely, discernibly a mass party of the working class. It commanded the mass of the votes of the working class. It had the affiliation of almost all the organizations of the working class, the trade unions, with one or two only exceptions, were a part of the Labour Party. Its councillors and many of its MPs, not as many as there ought to have been, but a significant number of its MPs and representatives were working class people. The situation we have today is that Boris Johnson got twice as many, get your head round this, twice as many votes from the working class as Jeremy Corbyn got. And that's because, first, as you correctly identify, propaganda works. Otherwise, why would people do it? Advertising, or we'll call legalized lying, and keep the aspidistra flying. The advertising industry is legalized lying. And political advertising, political propaganda is legalized lying. And the legalized lies against Corbyn were unceasing across all media, day and night, for more than 4 years, and that's a long time in politics. How do we handle it? Well, first of all, we have to be calm under fire. I learned from McGahey as a teenager this lesson of not running, because if you don't run, they can't chase you. And if you're not running, it means you're facing them. And if you're facing them, you have more of a chance of expressing your stand in a clear and principled way to your would-be chaser, to your adversary. That means, therefore, we need to be clear about where we stand. And I think the Workers' Party is admirably clear. And as time goes on, we'll be admirably clear about more things. Clearly, we don't have a policy on absolutely everything. We're only a few months old. Issues come up, events will occur, but we'll be admirably clear about where we stand on these events. We'll be, I hope and I believe, good at communicating them in a way that other parties are not, because we're not hidebound by the exigencies of political correctness and so on in the way that these other parties are. So that, for example, on the trans issue, we're able to very clearly say trans women are trans women, and trans men are trans men. And we will treat such people with absolute decency and politeness as we would anybody else. But we will not be bullied or blackmailed into accepting that a trans woman is actually a woman, and that public policy needs to be amended to allow trans women to change in girls' changing rooms and swimming pools and so on and so on. Do you see my point? We are clear. There's no obfuscation on our part. There's no faffing around. We are clear. We express ourselves clearly, and we have an intellectually coherent set of ideas. But finally, you know, Sophia, you need courage in politics. If you're a coward in politics, you'll eventually be unmasked. You'll eventually be useless if you're a coward. I quoted to you before Dr. Martin Luther King in his speech in Alabama the night before his murder, when he was speaking at a strike meeting of the striking refuse collection workers in Alabama. In Atlanta, he said, some men, forgive the pronoun, some men do things because they are popular. Other men do things because they are profitable. I do things because they're right. And that's exactly what we will always do. We will do things, say things, stand for things because we believe that they are right, even if they are the reverse of popular, even if they are the reverse of profitable. Take our stand on the Red Army, for example. As it happens, I could do no other and have all of my life felt this way. But it's not necessarily popular for us to demand respect for the Red Army, to defend the Soviet Union and its role in defeating fascism. That's not necessarily popular, you know. Even in Russia, it's not profitable. Never mind here in Britain, but it's right. And we do it because it's right. And I believe that the wages of sin are death, that the wages of unprincipled behavior in the end are political death. And I could go on in my biblical run. What would it profit a man to owneth the whole world and loseth their soul?
Thanks, George. On that note, I think it's probably a good idea that I just remind our viewers, there's a point from our party programme here, just in response to some of the comments were made in a previous contribution. The Workers' Party stands with all those countries that have attempted to break free of imperialist domination and build a different kind of world. We defend the achievements of the USSR, China, Cuba, etc., and not least the debt owed by humanity to the Soviet Union and Red Army in their war of liberation against German fascism. We categorically reject the attempt by the ruling class, its paid agents, and the EU imperialist bloc to rewrite history so as to equate the Soviet Union with Hitlerite Germany. We shall defend the positive historical legacy of the Soviet Union, as well as all those today who struggle for socialism, for an alternative world order. That's from our party programme. Let's go to John Larkin. You've had your hand up there.
Can you hear me, George?
Yes, I can now, John.
Hi, you're right. Yeah, some good points from Fran, Colin, and Sophia. My, I kind of just wanted to go back to the leadership election for Labour and why people like, well, all the leadership candidates, particularly Rebecca Long-Bailey, signed up to the Board of Deputies 10 pledges when clearly there's a problem. Well, she has a problem with those demands. Why did she sign up to them in the first place? I mean, number 5, for instance, says any MPs, peers, councillors, members or CLPs who support, campaign or provide a platform for people who have been suspended or expelled in the wake of anti-Semitic incidents should themselves be suspended from the membership. I mean, that at the time, to me, that seemed a blatant attempt to thin the party. And it kind of said to me, you know, if you're, I mean, obviously, I know Chris Williamson was chased out of town. But if you're campaigning for Rebecca Long-Bailey or Chris Williamson, you're just as vulnerable. You are, in their eyes, you're an accessory to the crime.
Well, quite so. John, can I just say that greater love hath no Manchester United supporter to be watching me instead of watching the game. I had to be here, you didn't. And I'm massively impressed that you have turned your back. Don't tell me the score.
I can multitask.
Don't tell me. I'm recording. I'm going to play
No. Yeah, so sorry, sorry. The second thing as well, I just want to kind of draw a parallel with, obviously we've spoken a lot obviously about Corbyn and about where it all went wrong. With, you know, where we spoke about Corbyn and how it all went wrong. But the similarities here, and I think you've mentioned it in the past, that, you know, obviously Corbyn was pro-Brexit and he was pro-Palestine. Now, he then swerved and changed tack on both those things. And I think you said it yourself, if you go back through the archives, there is video footage and photographs of Corbyn saying the complete opposite to what he believed at the time of, you know, of his election and stuff. It's a double standard. And I think, finally, I think it's a bit rich for people like, you know, the Socialist Campaign Group, people like John McDonnell, to call for solidarity, because they weren't there for Ken Livingstone and they weren't there for Chris Williamson. I don't think they were there much for you when you were expelled. So what solidarity is to the left? And this for me is the problem. There's no consistency. So you'll stand up for one person because the face fits, but not the other. And, you know, no one bothers to call out the fact that actually the problem is that the Board of Deputies' demands don't actually stand up to proper scrutiny. So that's kind of all I want to say.
They don't stand up to scrutiny, and any right-thinking person would have refused to sign them. One of them did refuse. It was a surprising one. I can't remember who it was, but it certainly wasn't Rebecca Long-Bailey, who signed them with alacrity. And they were deliberately written to tie up any future Labour leader as a prisoner of the particular pro-Israel, in fact, pro-Netanyahu positions of the Board of Deputies. For example, they made it unlawful for any of the Labour leadership candidates to have relations with, as Colin put it earlier, the wrong type of Jews. So they were not allowed to have relations with Jewish Voices for Labour and other socialist, leftist Jewish organizations, some of them political, some of them not. They were not allowed to have relations with the ultra-Orthodox Jews of the Neturei Karta group and others like them, who constitute a huge percentage of the international Jewish population. By 2050, a majority of Jewish children being born in the world will be being born to Jewish anti-Zionist parents. That's the difference of the birth rate of these anti-Zionist Jewish organizations, and their, they have big families by the grace of God, and they are absolutely irreconcilable to Zionism, to Israel, and so on. All of the relations with any and all of these was precluded by the list of 10 demands. What kind of self-respecting would-be political leader would accept the diktat in total, the diktat of a group of religious leaders who don't even represent all of the people that they claim to represent? There are many Jewish congregations, synagogues, organizations, and so on that the Board of Deputies does not represent, let alone the secular leftist Jews and the religious congregations about which I've just spoken. What kind of political leader? Would you accept a diktat of 10 demands from the Pope or from the Presbyterian Church in Belfast What kind of political leader would do that? But they did, and Long Bailey did. And at that point, she abandoned any entitlement to solidarity. She hasn't even shown solidarity with the friend whose article she tweeted. She's put the mark of Cain on the forehead of the very friend that she was supposedly eulogizing by circulating her material. None of these people should dare whisper the word solidarity. John McDonnell, solidarity, you don't make me laugh. What solidarity did you show to Williamson? What solidarity did you show to your old friend and colleague of 40 years standing, Ken Livingstone? What solidarity did you show to me? Nothing, zero, duck's egg. So solidarity in the mouth of such people really ought to turn to ash. And I'm glad to say they are yesterday's men. MacDonald will be out of politics quite soon, and he will have written only a very small footnote in history, and that footnote will say that he betrayed everything he ever said that he ever stood for.
Thank you, George. Let's go to Claire.
Right, can you hear me?
I can, Claire.
Oh, this Tuesday night is just music to my ears. I feel very naive at these meetings. I feel proficient in my job, but I think politically I've got huge areas of naivety. But nevertheless, I do like to talk. If I take a look very quickly at the 10 points on the programme, the first one is to end imperialist wars. Doesn't this fit in perfectly with Israel and Palestine? It is an imperialist war because it's supported wholeheartedly by America. And if Israel did not have the backing of the United States, I do not think that it would be in the position it's in at the moment. They are, for me, I don't know what the analogy would be, but they're really America's power, aren't they, in that region? And getting maybe the ethnic cleansing of Palestine is something they actually believe in, but even if they didn't, they do it anyway, because it just fits in with aggrandizement and spreading imperial power. The other point I'd like to make is, although I've agreed with everything tonight, that there's great hope that in Britain, 18 to 35-year-olds want so much of what our programme is. They're very concerned about the environment. They're very concerned about social issues, and I include in that justice. I teach in an inner city comprehensive. It's multicultural, and our kids know about Israel, and our kids know the reality. So they bring that. They're no fools. And so I think that Corbyn and that movement now was a stepping stone, but it's not enough. It's not radical enough. And what we offer is more radical. And that's the only way it can go. So I think that the programme we offer does have hope for young people. How many thousands of votes did Corbyn lose by in 2017? Not many. You know, so yes, propaganda works, but it wasn't that successful. And if he hadn't messed up with Brexit, I do believe it'd be a Labour administration. I'm kind of glad it isn't, though, because we'd have got a diluted version. This way, when it happens, it will be proper. The other final thing I'd like to say really quickly is point 9 is open and access to all forms of culture and the media. They swamped, as you said, George, they kept probing what's going to get traction. The anti-Semitic thing kind of got traction, so they went with it. But that's because they've got the media, the mainstream media, in their pockets. But we know that, and in that awful Tory phrase of going forward, we need to know that, and we need to know how to be clever and how to deal with that and how to get our message out, you know, because young people don't even watch the television, you know, young people don't even watch BBC. It's a different world. And so this party has to be ready for that new world. Okay, thanks for the time. Thank you.
Well, that's very beautifully expressed, Claire, I must say. I was just saying on my nightly RT America broadcast earlier this evening that new statistics show that virtually no one under 30 watches television news on the mainstream channels at all, or even watches television at all. They might watch Match of the Day, maybe, but the idea that they're watching Newsnight, if I tell you that my show on Sunday night is shaping to be the biggest one of all, we are well on our way to beat the 1.1 million viewer record. I don't know why, but it's already 500,000 after 48 hours, and it will climb over 1 million, I'm sure. Newsnight is watched by about 80,000 people. The New Statesman is bought by about 20,000 people. The Guardian is read by, or certainly bought by, less than 100,000 people. The woman that does the politics on Sky on Sunday morning, her audience is less than 100,000 people. Andrew Marr's is no more than 200,000 people. So I'm saying that to buttress your point, that yes, propaganda works, but it didn't work all that well, and it's working less and less well. After all, Corbyn, to answer your implied question, came within 2,277 votes in 2017 of winning, of being the Prime Minister. Now that's spread across, of course, the constituencies that Labour narrowly failed to win, but with that tiny number of extra Labour votes, he would have won. He didn't win, mainly because of the enemy within, because the propaganda offensive against him was a failure, except on anti-Semitism. But you're right, the IRA smear failed. It has no traction anymore. The idea that you might once have met a Czech diplomat for tea in the House of Commons in 19 Oatcake is so obscure and so deadened as a smear now that it can be said also to have completely failed. Only anti-Semitism worked, and it very nearly didn't work. Now, given that we have no enemy within, our absolute, if we're determined about any one thing, it is that we will never have an enemy within. Our unity will be absolute. There will be no element of systematic sabotage or undermining ever permitted in the Workers' Party. So us minus an enemy within, and ready to face media onslaught in an age of diminishing returns. By definition, if the media is fading, failing, then its campaigns, its assaults against us or people like us also have less traction than they once would have had. Mr. Wilson stood for nothing like what we stood for, but I can assure you the media in 1967 against Harold Wilson was pretty vicious. But that media is all dead now. Many of these newspapers no longer exist now. Those that still exist are hardly bought by anyone. Even the Sun is going rapidly out of business. So the media landscape is changing. Therefore, the propaganda landscape is changing. We're quite good at propaganda, and we're going to get better still. And our audiences are multiplying, vaulting in a way that must bring tears to the eyes of other media houses. I've got the biggest current affairs audience in Britain. Imagine. Well, it's a fact. Thanks very much indeed, all of you. Nobody tell me the score, because I'm going now to watch the match. Thank you.
Thanks very much, George. That's been an excellent meeting. Apologies to everyone that still had questions to ask, or I've had quite a few written contributions that we haven't had time to get through, but please do join us for our members meeting tomorrow evening. To all the members that are here speaking in the chat, and to anyone else who's been watching online and enjoying the content, if you'd like to get involved, please do go to the party website and sign up, and then you'll be able to join in with these meetings as a participant and in all our other events. So thank you very much, everyone, and good evening.